Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another election special with myself, Chris Ogle. And today we have Richard Harrington with us from the Conservative Party. So come and say hello, Richard.
Hi, Chris. Speaking to you from the Reeds estate.
You're in the Reeds estate, are you?
Well, I'm in my flat because the office is so full of people. I thought we couldn't find a place where it would be quiet, so I thought it better to do it from home.
Excellent. Okay. Well, thank you for joining.
I wouldn't be like Sharon Osbourne, sort of do it live from bed, you know, or what's the name, Yoko Ono. So I thought, no, my living room is more appropriate. Mr. Chris Ogle and your channel.
Well, it's very good of you to join us. I know that it must be incredibly busy right now because we're only essentially 2 days away from the election. So what we're going to do, Richard, is just go through a little bit of finding out, if you like, how things have been going in the run-up to the election, where you've been, what you've been up to, and who you've been talking to. So the first question I want to ask is, we've had a phenomenal number of hustings in Watford. I don't know how many we've had now, but it's been...
I call it hustings I think in total there's been about, well, I think it was 13.
It's amazing. How have they been?
Well, it's quite funny because you get into a routine, and whilst the Watford campaign's not got very much national press, funny enough, there was a guy from the Financial Times who came to do a kind of profile on the campaign and the hustings. And I had coffee with him at Pleasance before. He saw all the candidates. So he said to me, what's it like? So I said, well, actually, it's like we're a tribute band, because Mr. Cameron's not here, it's me, Mr. Clegg's not here, it's Dorothy Thornhill, etc., etc. So I just said it as a sort of joke over coffee. But when he wrote up the article, he actually said we were like an aging rock band. What he actually meant was that, and this is the true answer to your question, is because we were appearing together night after night, we sort of knew each other's acts. It was a bit like... you know those T-shirts with European tour? So it's like 23rd of April, St. Luke's Church, 25th, etc., etc. And by the end, there's a certain, well, I'm very pleased to say, a civilised relationship between all the candidates. We did feel like we could almost play each other's parts. You know, like at the theatre, I'm sure actors, they've heard the other ones, other lines of the other characters so well, they could probably play any of them. So it was a bit like that, because the questions, although the questions weren't pre-arranged or forced, but naturally people ask, give or take, the same sort of questions every night. So it became a bit like that. It became a bit like a play. But having said that, the people I spoke to were in the audience, the few people that were non-partisan, because a lot of people come with, particularly the smaller parties, bring their groups with them. Congratulations to those members of the Green Party that sat through them all. I really do congratulate you. But the people who came, let's call them civilians, like from the area of where each was, I think people actually really enjoyed it. And the amazing thing to me was that on the last Thursday, which was the last one, which was at Abbots Langley Methodist Church, I thought, and I was chatting to Matt Termaine about this, the Labour candidate, I thought we're not going to get many people because it competes directly with the question time that the Prime Minister and Ed Miliband and Nick Clegg were on, same time. But yet there were at least 150 people. So I think that's a good thing. I think it's the sort of thing that I get when I do them on my own at the public meetings I've had for the last 5 years. I think it's a sort of, it's much better than what you and I are doing in a way, because what we're doing is electronic, it's modern, very good. But it's good that the facility of the old-fashioned, you know, like town hall meetings, whatever they used to call them, I think it's good that that still exists. Long may it continue. Having said that, Chris, and this is the relevance of your channel, I think the majority of the audience were older rather than younger. So probably younger people, as time goes on, won't look to a hustings as something to come to, but they will look more to seeing things on the internet, which is fair enough, but we do need both.
What's been your view on the level of engagement? Because clearly you've been through one of these election campaigns already, so you've got some experience there. How does this one compare to last time?
Well, yes, I have been through it once before. Other people, of course, have been through it many, many times. Dorothy, for example, has been standing for all different things for a long time. She'd probably be a better person to answer the sort of broader question in longevity terms. In my case, compared to the two, in the last election, my name as an individual wasn't particularly known. Obviously, Conservative Party, David Cameron was. I had to build up despite the fact that I first came here in 1979, I was just living an ordinary life in terms of any public stuff, you know. I wasn't involved in anything really from a public perspective. So I had to make my name in about 14, 15 months. This time, because I've had 5 years of just doing, you know, the kind of stuff you do, schools, businesses, churches, charities, meeting people like yourself, etc., business groups, there's a lot more familiarity. So I run into a lot more people in the streets, in cafes, as well as the traditional, what politicians call the doorstep. But a lot more groups of people, a lot more institutions, if you like, have familiarity. Whereas last time I really was just the Conservative boy, as in the representative of the Conservative Party.
But has there been more engagement? Would you say there is more interest in this election than there was in the last one?
That's a good question. I don't want to knee-jerk my answer because I'm trying to think it through. By the way, if you see on Newsnight and things, when they say it's a good question, that means they don't know how to answer, you know, whoever's on, Evan Davis, etc. I actually think the majority of people, I'm afraid to say, this sounds quite cynical, are not that interested in politics. And I don't see a difference this time to last time. 3 weeks ago, there was a poll in the paper, this is not Watford, but nationally, which absolutely shocked me. 40% of people were unaware that there was an election this year. And this was only February or March. Now, I think what Tony Blair said, I think it was Tony Blair said in his book, that people begin to concentrate only 2 weeks before an election in Britain on politics. I think that's probably true. But most people are living their lives quite busily. They've also had in Watford to think of what's happened with the football team, which, I mean, talk about, you know, when Kennedy says, you know, today I'm a Berliner. I mean, crikey, the number of Watford supporters who I've never seen before in the high streets. I mean, I wish I was in the replica shirt business. But for those of us that have stood it, this is my third cycle of Watford being promoted. I think it did take people's minds a lot. And probably a good thing over the bank holiday weekend, they weren't thinking that much about politics. So I don't think it'd be right to say there's like an election mania that there wasn't last time. Compared to, I mean, my father often spoke of the 1945 general election when all anybody talked about was whether they were going to vote for Attlee or Churchill. I don't think we've seen those times since, and I don't think we're anywhere near that. And I'm obviously in favour of anything that brings politics to the forefront of people because, you know, as I say to all the school kids, nearly half of everything you ever earn in your life is going to be spent by other people, i.e. politicians. So people should take an interest in it. But I don't quite see it. The only exception I've seen in Watford in the last few weeks, ironically, was when Boris came on Saturday morning. Boris has a kind of appeal, and I'm not talking about his politics, left, right, centre, or leadership of the Conservative Party, mayor of London, whatever, but as an individual, he attracts people in a way that I've not seen. Now, if that is a way of turning people onto politics, good. Probably Nigel Farage, who I've not met, they say he similarly when he does walkabouts. But certainly Mr. Clegg and Mr. Cameron and Mr. Miliband are not that kind of people. That doesn't mean they're not serious people, but they're not into the sort of, you know, that celeb culture field. And maybe, ironically, if people don't get more interested in politics generally, I think we're going to see more of this celeb kind of appeal. I mean, we might see at some stage someone like George Clooney becoming president of the United States. I don't know about here, but the kind of following that the people, you know, like for example in a different field, David Beckham gets and people like that, we don't really see very much in politics, and yet that's the dominant culture in this country, not politics.
I heard that the Hustings at Queen's was quite lively. What made that lively compared to some of the others?
Really, because it was the only one that there were young people there, because it was a school. So when you get, active sixth formers who are studying politics, which is a small subset of general sixth formers, but there were people that were very interested. I think that made it more lively. And also, under Mr. Kevin Rooney, a person who I disagree with politically, but have a huge amount of respect and I hope it's mutual with, he fires up young people to get interested in politics. And he does it in such a way that's actually not, it's controversial. It's not biased in any party way, but he gets them moving. That's why they're very keen participants in the debating competition that I do. Although this last year, for the first year, they didn't actually win. They won the first 3 years. And I think some of his students came. So that's the difference. Not that they were rude or anything, but it was, as you say, a bit more heated up.
I also read with interest that the Sarah Jane Trebar was at the Watford Grammar and that husting, and I've subsequently seen her document which lays out where each of the candidates stands with regards to the allotments, and it's quite interesting just to see the. I read the write-up about your own, which basically said support the hospital and whatever the hospital wants to do. Really, that's kind of where you fit. And it is interesting though to see how that's being played out as a bit of a political football.
Well, it is, because the opposition, Labour in this case, have sort of said, well, they could see the political advantage in it. But I mean, I've respect for Sarah Jane and disagree with her because I have to look at the public interest being the general population of my constituency, or what was my constituency, and what I hope will be my constituency again, for the sake of the official record. But no, it's perfectly fair. She asked a perfectly fair question, and I think she got a very straight answer. And that, well, about the relocation, the allotments, etc. I won't go through the arguments because I'm sure everybody knows them. But I thought it was quite legitimate for her to ask that question. It's exactly what hustings are, and it's quite right that people answered it.
Where have you been out and about, sort of walking the streets? Have you been out and around doing some doorstep knocking?
I have. I've concentrated mainly, though, Chris, this time. This is different from last time. I've concentrated a lot on speaking to larger groups of people because I've been invited to, from groups of people in people's houses, to, well, actually non-political groups, really, lots of older people's homes, not schools, they've been on holiday, but I've been invited to quite a few groups of people, and I've done some door knocking, but I've got quite a lot of volunteers around, as people may have noticed. So what I tend to do is, if people say we'd like to see the candidate, they then text me, and then I'm round hopefully in a few minutes, or if not the following day. So I've been engaged with a lot of people. But I find the process that politicians do of bang, 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 I'm watching EastEnders or something, it's not convenient. It's not the best way to get one's views or the kind of person one is across. I've always felt a bit embarrassed by it.
Has there been, in all the kind of conversations you've been involved in, groups, etc., more of an interest in what's going on locally and what's happened locally? Or have the discussions been about the main issues, which we'll come on to some of them in a short while?
I've found that people understand that this is a national general election. So a lot of the discussions, which I've not found, I must say in the last 5 years, when I've held my public meetings every month, a lot more local questions, more actually for council type questions. But I think now people realise this is actually about whether Mr. Cameron or Mr. Miliband walks into Downing Street on Friday or Monday or whenever it is. So if I say national issues, it's kind of the local equivalent of national issues. So for example, if you talk about jobs and the economy, they want examples of what's been going on locally. It's not just, people don't sort of say, oh, Richard, very good to see you. I read that growth is, 2.3%, whatever it is. It's not that kind of a macro question. But it is a worry about what's going to happen to their future in a national way. And some people, though, you get different people. You get people who actually ask very, very micro questions. like the planning permission at the end of the street, or almost like I suppose, what's the classical dog poo question? But no, I'd say at least for the last few weeks, if not generally, people tend to think of the national thing, probably because every time they turn the television on, Mr. Cameron's on, or one of these people, and that's, for the moment, controlling people's thoughts, if they are interested. But, somebody, again, quoting one of the great polls, I mean, with the exception of the 2 weeks prior to the election, I'm told that the research shows, I think Facebook did a piece of research that shows that the average British person thinks about politics for about 3 minutes per week. That even though there's a general election, I don't think it's more than, for most people, about 10 or 15 minutes, because, as I said before, they're living their lives. Their children, the fact that there's a general election on, children still go to school, they still go to work, they still have to go to Tesco's, etc., etc. So we can't expect to occupy people's thoughts day and night. It's just not like that.
It's quite interesting. I get out and about quite a bit as well, and I talk to a lot of different people. I get a sense from a person who just talks to a lot of lay people in the street that there's a general feeling amongst business people that if it was another Tory with Lib Dems, this wouldn't be a horrible situation, because kind of it's been all kind of okay for the last few years. I talk to people who have been hit quite badly by austerity, in terms of maybe they're struggling to get their benefits paid and stuff like that, because there's all sorts of rules about that. I get conversations that people say, well, do you know what, I can't really trust Labour to come in and sort this out, because they left a bit of a mess when they left back in the day. Why don't we give UKIP a chance, because they're a bit fresh-faced. And then you get people who say, well, do you know what, this is not really working very well anymore. Maybe we ought to have a completely different rethink and maybe go with the Greens. I mean, I hear all of these different things.
I think I've heard them all myself. And obviously I would argue one way, but I think they're all quite legitimate comments. If I can try and sort of sift through them myself, in no particular order. I think your first point was the people that say, well, the coalition's been fine. I think, and I would predominantly agree with that, in so much that I'm very proud to have been part of it. And I think that, let's talk locally if you like, the things like unemployment being more than halved, the 3,300 apprenticeships, I mean, we could go through them. And in difficult times, Watford getting significant investment in education, the health service, etc. Yeah, I'm very proud of it. I'm a Conservative. I'm not a Liberal Democrat, because I believe it's the modern progressive Conservative view of things, which led me, after voting for Tony Blair in 1997 and formally being a member of the SDP, it's David Cameron's form of moderate conservatism that actually brought me into it. I would obviously argue that the main things that the Conservative Party stands for are the things that I would be in favour of. But I'm not going to sit here and badmouth Liberal Democrats, because I think they've been largely very mature in the coalition, and well done to them. I'd like to see a Conservative government. I'd like to see lower taxation. There's lots of things I'd like to see. But I don't think, I wouldn't insult anyone's intelligence by saying it's a disaster if there was a coalition with Lib Dems. I suspect that more Lib Dems, and Dorothy Thornhill said that she's much more leaning towards Labour, and lots of Lib Dems are. So I don't think it's a possibility going ahead. But if it was with the Lib Dem parties before, I'd be quite satisfied with it. So that's that point. Second point was the point we made, that people have had benefits removed, and I didn't quite go into detail, but basically they've been hit quite hard personally by it. And I think also that is very true. The fact is, a lot of people were on benefits that did not deserve to be. To me, the tragedy is that I'd rather see the people that remain on benefits, who genuinely can't find a job, and sick people getting significantly more. I don't believe all this rubbish that you read in some of the papers about, everyone on benefits living in a 3-bedroom house with, earning 100 grand a year, or the rubbish that you read. It's nonsense. It's not fun being on benefits at all. It really isn't. I suspect you and I probably speak to a lot of the same kind of people. It's been my job to do so. And I'm not proud of it, but the adjustment needed to be making. There were people who'd been on what used to be called sick benefit for 20 years without any form of assessment. There were people who were making no effort whatsoever to try and find a job. And I think the correction that's been done there, where everything now is geared towards people finding jobs suitable to them, I think it's very much to the benefit of society. And I make no excuses for it. But yeah, people that are really sick, Chris, I would like to see receiving significantly more money. The only way we're going to do that is by growing the economy dramatically. And anyone that pretends there's another way around it, I think they're not right. And your next point, and so I do listen to what you say, was people that say, well, I think basically they're all the same. What about fresh-faced UKIP? Well, a vote for UKIP without any question, and for those that do read The Sun, they should read it today, where they're saying very clearly a vote for UKIP is putting Ed Miliband in Downing Street. The great irony of it is that for those people that Europe is important to, the last thing they should do is vote UKIP, because what they're going to do is get a Labour government who won't have a referendum. It's only a Conservative government that will go for a referendum. Cameron has staked his whole reputation on it. So I think whatever one's views on Europe, I think people should vote Conservative. And as for Nigel, the career politician who's been an MEP for 15 years, public school boy, all this drivel. And when he came to Watford, it's quite funny. He writes, there was something in the Observer. I've never met Nigel Farage, so I don't know him from Adam. Seems quite a convivial bloke. But there was something in the Watford Observer, which they'd obviously press release, saying your MP, at the time was me, was one, a career politician, and two, a close associate of David Cameron. So I wrote this letter to Nigel through surreptitious purposes. A friend gave me his home address in Kent, and I wrote him in a handwritten, not like a formal thing, on personal notepaper. It wasn't like a government or parliamentary thing. Saying, dear Nigel, I was given your address by a mutual friend. I closed a copy of Watford Observer. I'd like to deal with the 2 points in turn. One, the fact I'm a career politician. Well, I didn't stand for Parliament until I was 52, so I think that's self-explanatory. Two, the fact that I'm a close friend of David Cameron. And then I put, alas, this is not true. I wish it were. Yours sincerely, but I didn't receive a reply. And then finally, the Greens bit. Yeah, I think Aidan Cotterill-Boyd, I struck me as a really decent man of principle, but it's a different way of life. And we either believe that we live in a sort of social capitalism kind of world where, basics, most of the money, the GDP is generated by business, etc., and there's a big redistribution of wealth to help people less fortunate themselves. I know it's a cliche, but it's the kind of social democratic, modern conservative consensus of the Western world. If you don't believe in that, then I think the green alternative is a perfectly principled alternative. It's not for me, because I think it's naive and impractical, but I respect him for it. And people have a clear choice, and some people may say, and I was chatting to Alex, who we both know, because I know you've done some work with him, this is not madness. I respect his view. I disagree with it, but it's a very clear alternative. And I think more people in time will lead to that form of alternative. I believe that the contemporary capitalistic system, which is not based on the exploitation of the working classes and all this stuff that they think, I do believe that capitalism has expanded a lot and will deal with a lot of the issues that worry them. The environment and green being one, redistribution of wealth being another, etc. But again, perfectly legitimate. I think I went through a lot there, Chris.
No, that's okay. I mean, one of the things that I've read I don't read a lot of the papers. I prefer to form my own opinion, but you get snippets of things from different places, and one of them is about if we spent more of our time focused on the businesses that are utilising tax loopholes, rather than, if you like, which is a significant sum of money, rather than chasing down, like a few. I mean, there's probably lots of them, but people who are if you like, work shy or not really sick and claiming benefits, that there's a lot of money that's going AWOL there that we could bring in and use in a much better way than we are at the moment.
I think the two are not in any way incompatible. I think benefit fraud is benefit fraud, and I think it's exactly right that the coalition government have done what they have. But the significant issue is legal tax avoidance schemes, which became hugely preeminent under the Labour government when companies that were not even in existence, like Google, Starbucks, etc., managed to set themselves up in such a way that the profits that they made, I mean, obviously legitimately owned the profits, were repatriated to countries of low tax. Ireland, I think, was a good example, and Luxembourg. And the coalition government has made great inroads into doing something about this. There's been a legislation called General Anti-Avoidance Measures, which make basically, instead of having to take loopholes to court, as always had to be, it's meant if the government, the HMRC, can prove the intention of doing something was to avoid tax, then it's held void. The new thing, which the Chancellor announced in the last budget, they call it the Google tax, and I'm afraid it's too long a title to explain actually what the real title is, but it basically says that if a company is not paying taxes commensurate with its turnover in the UK, the government have the power through HMRC to impose a 25% tax on turnover, which clearly is far more than, because corporation tax is 20%. And I think this will eradicate it. But I think the corporation's got a good record. Danny Alexander, the Liberal Democrat Chief Secretary of the Treasury, who's been very solid on this, I think he said that we as a government have collected about 7 billion in money, not fraudulent money, but money that was legally but perhaps immorally tax avoided. And I'm all in favour of a lot more of this kind of thing. We've got to have a level playing field. And the war, and it's been a war that's taken place between the big accounting firms representing these companies and the government. I mean, it happens in America, it happens in all free countries because, you know, governments make laws and people they've had a legal right to do what they can to get around them. And I think, in my view, the balance is moving now towards, in our case, HMRC, but government. A lot of stuff's got to be done internationally, though, because, you know, if you can move from one country to another, but it seems to me the principle that if you trade in Britain, you pay your tax in Britain is something that has now finally caught up with the complex wave of international tax systems. I'll just give you a quick example. It might be on a bit, but the Labour government, for very good reason, brought in a, I forget what it was called, but it was basically, if you invested in a film that was made in Britain, it was completely tax deductible because the government, quite properly, Gordon Brown, I think, was Chancellor, wanted to encourage British films to be made. Very laudable thing. Now, you think, well, that's good, because it means that we're going to encourage films to be made here that would be made abroad. Yeah, but you've heard, I'll mix my two cliches, that if there's light at the end of the tunnel, someone will drive a coach and horses through it. So, of course, these schemes spread up that people were pre-selling a film. For example, a TV series made by ITV that was pre-sold. Well, it's actually made by an independent company that was pre-sold to ITV. So there's no risk because it was pre-sold. Otherwise, they wouldn't have made it in the first place. That was qualifying under this umbrella of the film thing. So, you know, the government's had to react to all this kind of stuff. But I'll tell you where I think there's been a difference, apart from all the enforcement that's taken place. And HMRC win the majority of these battles. I mean, all that stuff about Jimmy Carr, what people forget is that Jimmy Carr actually, that scheme fell in the court and they all had to pay penalties and everything like that. But I think the difference is that a few years ago, there was no moral compass on this. It was felt that if your accountant said it was okay, then it was okay because that was the law. I do believe now that for big companies that say they have a social conscience, and also for small businesses as well, but I think it applies less in this case because obviously they don't have KPMG and all these fancy accounting firms acting for them. I think there is now a moral view that shareholders pension funds who own most of these big public companies are saying, we don't expect you to push the line of this. We expect to behave responsible in every country that you're in. And I think there has been a moral change. And maybe some of my more left-wing fellow candidates would disagree with that, but I think there's a moral compass as well as a legal one.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think people are becoming more of a corporate social responsibility. That is expanding that whole area, and quite rightly so. And businesses are part of the community, and they should play a part in that community. I feel quite strongly about that as well.
The thing is, Chris, that people, just to put this to bed, people, there's certain things that law-abiding citizens think are like a victimless crime. So, for example, an honest person goes on holiday, gets a camera stolen. Suddenly, it's for the insurance company, it's the most expensive camera that ever existed in the history of cameras. They don't think they're being dishonest because morally they think, well, I've been paying my insurance for 20 years and at last I got the chance to claim. Well, I think some people think that tax avoidance is a bit like that. They don't think, well, I'm robbing the government and therefore they'll find it hard to pay benefits. They think, crikey, I'm working all the hours, somebody pays me cash. And I do think I think there is a moral compass. As I say, I think things are moving in the right direction on that. But in the end, it's for government to legislate and for government to tighten up. And that's what people expect a government to be for. But we don't live in a Big Brother society. We really don't. And I'm sure no one would want people snooping around every corner, sort of watching someone put 10 quid into their hand for, I don't know, cleaning windows or something. Society has to strike a balance as well.
Yeah, one of the other things, and I think it's especially relevant around here, but of course it does play on the national scene as well, is the cost of housing. And this is a subject I've brought up with some of the other candidates. In Watford, we have we're not London, so we haven't got ridiculous prices, but they are beyond the scope of young people, with the average age of a first-time buyer being somewhere around 37 these days. We've got a real struggle going on with the young people of today, for the first time ever, looking like they're not going to be able to do what their parents have done, and a fairly voracious buy-to-let sector, which is essentially keeping keeping the prices high artificially, and actually the rental property market is more expensive than if you can get a mortgage these days. This is a huge problem here in the UK, probably fairly exclusively so because in Europe there's a lot more of renting people a home rather than renting for profit.
Yes.
And
sorry, you just disappeared. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah. So in terms of, I mean, it is a national problem, but it's really quite a challenge certainly in the Watford area and the surrounding areas.
Well, I'll give you a real live example. Me. I mean, I moved here in 1979 to work for Truings and Queen's Road. I was paid £4,000 a year, a reasonable salary at the time. 1983, I think it was, I'd been given a couple of pay rises. I was £7,000 a year. My first flat was £21,000. That's 3 times my earnings. And like most people, I'd saved a few hundred quid, borrowed a few hundred quid from my dad, got a mortgage and rented out the second bedroom to a friend to help mortgage. I mean, it was bog standard. All of my contemporaries did it. Now, to say how difficult it is for my kids, for everybody's kids, that same salary today at John Lewis Partnership, because I checked with them when I first did this calculation, I think it was 28 to 29,000. I mean, good payers, they're always happy. That same flat, according to Rightmove, or one in the street, sold for 290,000. That's 10 times. Now, why is this? UKIP would say it's immigrants. They blame everything on immigrants of Europe. Some of them would say it's the exploitation by greedy landlords and builders, etc. The truth is, it's the disconnect, as the Americans would say, between supply and demand. Because build costs have kept more or less with inflation. I mean, obviously they're more expensive, but then everything's more expensive. They're no more expensive than, say, the increase in the price of bread or anything. So the difference is the land price. And the land price is entirely a result of supply and demand. Now, why has the supply gone down and the demand gone up? I know this is obvious, but people have to think these prices don't come out of Barrett's. These people don't just suddenly decide we're going to charge 450,000, not 220,000. It's not like the difference is profit. I'm sure their profit margins are much the same as they were in those days. I would imagine 10% or 15%, something like that. And it's because that, first of all, the demographic pressures, of which, yes, immigration is part of it, but then people come here for jobs. Another thing is people, families with divorce and everything wanting effectively 2 units, parents now not living at home with children, compared to, say, for example, people from the Indian subcontinent where generations live together. There's a lot of pressures on that. And on the supply side, we've seen a situation where most people object to almost every planning application that's near to them. So there's many people, including members of my own family, who I should not name because she'd be annoyed, but they complain their children are not can't get on the housing ladder, but basically object to every planning application with petitions and all that in the area which they live. Well, what's the answer to it? I mean, if we take Watford as a good example because we all know it, I suspect it's no difference to many existing towns. We've basically got 2 large urban regeneration schemes left in Watford, one of which is the health campus, which is one reason why I support it, because it'll provide so much private and social housing and jobs. And secondly, the redevelopment of Watford Junction, which again will be a big development and it will have a mixture of that. Apart from that, Watford's more or less full. I mean, there'll be bits and pieces, obviously, but it's not like a huge area of brownfield development. Basically, all governments, all the manifestos, also we're going to have brownfield. And here we are. It's like people. I offer 200,000 houses. We're going to have 300,000. It's all rubbish. It's all rubbish. Places like Watford are, within the curtilage that they are now, more or less full. Again, except for a couple of big schemes, as I've said. So, I don't think people are going to get used to, I really enjoy living in a flat. A lot of people in other countries enjoy living in flats, because they're not packed together, there's greenery outside, you've got a parking space and all that kind of stuff. But most people don't see flats as being the answer. And it takes a long time to change social views and that sort of thing. So it seems to me the only way we're going to dramatically change things is having new towns, like happened in the interwar years and other periods in history when this country's really grown. Because democracy is democracy. People aren't going to take a demolition of the green belt around each town so each town becomes bigger and bigger. Because in the end of the day, the public interest is democracy. And democracy, you can just tell from speaking to people, it's not what they want. So I think, given the fact that 92% of the country is not developed, we're going to have to find areas which at the moment are not very fashionable, but by really good transport links, nice places to work, etc. Places like Welling and Milton Keynes and others grew in the first place. I think we're going to have to do a lot more of that, but the planning system makes it very difficult. Ebbsfleet, for example, down in Kent, I mean, the Labour government started it, the coalition took the file down and dusted it and re-announced it, but it's still not gone through all the public inquiries and everything. But I think the end product of that will be a good one. And I think the way that the developments happened in places like Watford, where they've developed properties without the infrastructure, doctors, surgeries, schools, etc., I think it's very wrong. I think it's the fault of government, national and local, of whatever political complexion they are, to forecast population movements and make sure that planning permissions themselves are contingent on the right forms of infrastructure. And I don't know if it's been announced, but I know my condition of my support for the health campus, that there is land for a school there and a doctor's surgery there. Then it becomes a natural settlement, really, rather than putting pressure on the others. But there's no simple answer, is there? And I think Labour's idea of bringing back rent controls are laughable. Look what happened before. One of the reasons I bought, and we all did, is because you couldn't rent. Because they brought in the rent controls to avoid, these Rachman-type slum landlords of the 60s who hugely exploited everybody. Government, again, well-intentioned government, thinks, oh, we're not going to have this, we're going to control the rent, etc. So what happens? There's no supply of rented property at all. We were sort of pushed into buying, which turned out to be a good thing. But you just couldn't think about renting. There wasn't really. There'd been odd bed-sitting things, but they weren't the vast amounts of opportunities in the private sector.
What in the run-up to the election here? I mean, immigration has been foisted on us again. And I was speaking to Aidan the other day, and Watford's a town that is very cosmopolitan. We've had immigration into Watford for longer than I can remember, is it something that's come up a lot, or is it something that like Aidan said, really people are not really switched on to that argument that strongly? Certainly not in the Watford constituency.
I'm with Aidan on that. I really think he's absolutely right. It's interesting that I'm told, just what I read what everybody else does in the press, that where it's a big issue are actually areas where there hasn't been a lot of immigration. Like, for example, they talk about these coastal towns that UKIP are very strong in. It's not like they're areas of big immigration. But it seems to me that I think most people would agree that nearly everybody came to Watford to work of different generations, and we're talking about from, I don't know, maybe your family came over with the Norman Conquest, Chris, but most of us didn't. And I think people realise that we're all immigrants of some type, and that the immigration to Watford has been hugely beneficial. But it's not something that I've caught a lot on the doorstep at all. Lack of facilities, doctors, surgeons, and this kind of stuff, absolutely. And I'm very pleased about the progress we've made on the Watford, for example, being the first in the country to be in the Prime Minister's Challenge Fund, where 7 days a week GP opening, etc. But some might think it's because of immigration. But what you don't find, and if anybody wants to prove this, I mean, there's now 1,015 people, or whatever, something slightly over 1,000 on job seekers allowance here. You go to the job centre, they're not. You can tell from the accents these are not immigrants. And I think the vast majority of people came here not for benefits but to work, and hopefully will continue to do so, simply because we need, a lot of companies need employees. But the infrastructure issue is a real one. It really is. It's a significant one, and it's the big challenge of the next government. But I think it's popular in certain circumstances to blame certain circles, shall we say, to blame everything on Europe and immigration. But for me, I don't think the public buy it.
No, I think I'm with. I think immigration is a good thing. What I do think is important, though, is that we do learn to count people in and count people out properly.
Without a doubt. And I think the 2012 or 13, I can't remember when it finally became law, Immigration Act has done a lot towards that, and also helped. Labour stood by absolute, uncontrolled, phony immigration for 13 years. Even in Watford, there were all these so-called colleges which sprung up, which were just ways of getting people in on education visas. And they've been dramatically cut down. This nonsense about endless appeals for people who were to be deported. The grounds are now down under that act from 14 to 4, which again I think is a really good thing. Nobody like immigrants. The last thing they want is people that break the rules or bend the rules. And they're probably the most vociferous in their arguments for tightening up. But we still have to not forget that people come to this country to work predominantly, and that's because our economy is growing. And it's obvious. I mean, some of our ancestors fled from persecution, including mine. I'm very pleased that the country, that's why we're all brought up to be so, my father said that it's the finest country in the world, and that's why he and his father and others had fought in the different wars. Maybe they weren't given a choice, but, they were given that one had to do it. It was their duty. I'm sure your parents, grandparents, etc. did in the same way. And they believe that tax is a kind of price you pay for belonging to the finest club in the world, which is being member of this country. I don't think much has changed there, but I don't think people like to see people breaking or bending the rules. And I think that's, as I say, I think that's from the immigrant community. They get actually more irate than anybody else about it.
I've got a question from Alex. You mentioned Alex earlier.
He's a greenie.
Yeah, well, yeah, his ancestors are from Scotland, so this is a slightly Scottish flavoured question.
He's Murray, isn't he?
Yeah.
That is a Scottish name, yeah.
Yeah, so he's with policies such as the removal of Trident, the halting of NHS privatisation, and the ending of the failed austerity policy. Why are the Conservatives fearful of the SNP when their policies are supported by the majority of the population?
Well, I think the Conservatives are frightened of the SNP simply because they disagree with their policies. I mean, I just can't believe that with Putin rampaging around the world, anyone could be against this country having a nuclear deterrent, but the SNP are. Labour are not, the SNP are. And I could, etc., etc. Austerity, I really don't buy all this austerity stuff. I mean, we have, on the one minute, the Conservatives, we're told by some people that we're part of austerity Britain, and by other people that, and quite rightly, that we've still got a deficit of £50 billion per year and a national debt of 1,400 trillion or whatever, 1.4 trillion, whatever it is. You can be one or the other. So I don't buy this austerity stuff. I think eventually we've got to get to a stage where we're not spending more than we're earning. Everybody knows that, and I do think it's like household economy. And I don't stand for anything the SNP do. However, I do think they've got one point, and that is that they've had in a referendum, but people voted for Scotland to. Their own people should decide. They did decide, and they voted to remain part of the UK. But I think the fear, and it's a legitimate fear from Conservatives, Liberals, and Labour, particularly Labour, I suppose, because they're the ones that will lose the seats, as the Conservatives basically only have one, and the Liberals have only a few. The fear is that SNP will actually control Mr Miliband, because in order to form a government, which he desperately wants to, obviously desperately wants to, I mean, he became leader of the party with the spat with his brother, and he very clearly wants to be Prime Minister. And there is a feeling that he will do a deal with the SNP, whatever he says, and that would mean selling out the core, that consensus values, which we've all had: national defence, some form of, call it austerity or not, but some form of reasonable policy to reduce the deficit, etc. And Alex and his colleagues in the Green Party, the thing that I disagree with them the most, respectfully, is that they just think we can go on getting bigger and bigger deficits, but who's going to lend us the money? So I do think there's a natural fear of the SNP. If I were just a party politician, I would say it's a good thing for the Conservative Party, because I think people will think we can't risk it. But I think from a national interest point of view, it would be an absolute disaster for Mr Miliband to be in the pockets of Mrs Nicola Sturgeon. I think it would be an absolute disaster.
Well, I hope Alex is pleased with that.
Sorry, Alex.
answer. I mean, we'll wrap it up in a second. So just a final few sort of questions, really.
I was just getting going, Chris.
Sorry?
I was just getting going.
Do you think there's going to be some considerable element of tactical voting?
I think there has been for some time now. It's interesting with Labour and the Liberals, and I sort of step back and watch this. Each of them is complaining, is arguing, the only way to stop me is by voting for the other one. I'm sure anyone who lives in Watford's noticed that. And they produced all sorts of different types of bar charts that happen to suit their argument. And I think it's quite legitimate. I read in the poll, in the paper yesterday, that in Sheffield Hallam, Nick Clegg's vote was back up in the polls because of Conservatives saying, well, we can't win, and we would rather have Mr Clegg than whoever the Labour opposition is. I think it's democracy. I think in Watford, I think it's had that quite a few times before, because it's been known as a three-way marginal for some time. I actually believe on Friday it will be a two-way marginal going ahead. We'll see whether that's right or wrong, but no, I think it's quite legitimate. One person, one vote. and it's quite right that they should decide to use that vote to get the nearest to what they want. Ironically, the UKIP argument is saying it is quite the opposite, because using their vote, particularly in a place like Watford, if I'm not an MP and my leader's not Prime Minister, they will not get a referendum on Europe, which is why I think so many people who are natural UKIP supporters are thinking, well, I can't risk it. It's not like the Euro elections or local elections where we can make a little protest. This is dead serious. This is who leads our country in the world. And it's either Mr. Ed Miliband or Mr. David Cameron.
I was going to say, do you think this is the end of two-party politics?
I think I've said enough on that, Chris.
I think
my iPad's exploding.
I think in Watford it's a really interesting situation, though, because you do have a particular set of circumstances this time around, which makes it a really interesting event. And I spoke to a lot of people who say they're going to stay up till 6 a.m. in the morning, and you know, when it's predicted that the Watford count will be completed. Do you think we're going to get into the realms of a recount?
No, I don't. And I think it'll be earlier than 6. I think the returning officer is a very cautious man, and he should be. I mean, that's his job. But I mean, I think he's sort of making expectations at the later end, you know, the lower end, because then if it's earlier, people think, good guy, you know, they've done it more quickly, because it's an urban seat, and the only complexity in terms of counting is that some votes come from Three Rivers areas, and I imagine they're delivered under a different system. But it's not like a huge geographical, you know, in some places it could take an hour and a half to drive in ballot boxes. I think it'll be earlier. But it does say in the official, I think the Press Association asked every constituency, and they did say 6 o'clock. But I would, if I were a betting man, I'd put it probably at 4 or earlier, but who knows. But no, I think it will be a decisive result, Chris. And
do you, well, what have you got planned between now and where is the count taking place anyway? I asked Aidan, he didn't have a clue. Actually.
Well, it's in the leisure centre, on opposite my office in the Avenue. So I shall be trying to solicit votes until 10 o'clock on Thursday with my team, and then I shall probably, I think I'll come here, obviously for a shower and a change, and watch telly for a bit with a few friends, and then go to the town hall, well, not town hall now, the leisure centre, when a bit nearer the time.
So is that the swimming pool, the new swimming pool?
Yeah. It's
right.
In the hall next, obviously not in the pool, it's in the hall next to it. But I hope they're going to put up some catering facilities, because there's a small cafe, but obviously that normally closes in the, you know, after the leisure centre normally closes. Otherwise, if anyone wants to make some money, if they get themselves a hot dog van and park it outside of it, do really well.
We should have a word with some of the guys from the Watford market.
Exactly. Well, it was nice to see them at the football celebration in the park yesterday. There were quite a few stallholders from the market, and most of them sold out, which is great.
Yeah, absolutely fantastic. That yeah, it was yesterday. And so, final question then, Richard. What's the result going to be in Watford?
I think, Chris, we will see a clear and decisive Conservative victory.
And on that note, I would like to thank you for coming on once again. It's always a pleasure, and I wish you all the best for Thursday, and I'm looking forward to seeing what happens. It's a very complex one.
Huge pleasure, Chris, and I hope we shall breakfast in the market very soon.
Fantastic. Okay, I'll say cheerio, and
See you soon.
That's the last of these shows, folks. There are no more, and it's now all down to us to vote on Thursday. So I'll say cheerio now, and I look forward to hearing the result Friday morning. Okay.